Once a month, Paula Pant, host of the Afford Anything podcast, answers voicemail questions the listeners send in. Here's one now.
Hi, Paula. First of all, thank you so much for all the great work you do at Afford Anything. My husband and I are huge fans, and we've learned so much from you. Here's our situation. For the last 2 years, we've lived off one of our incomes while using the other to aggressively pay off our student loans and save for a house. We've reached the goal of paying off all of our loans, and we've saved about $40,000 for a down payment on a house. Buying a house was a plan until my husband was offered a job in England for 2 years. We decided to take it, and we will be moving in November. The job is temporary, and our plan is to move back to the U.S. in about 2 years. So here's our question. What should we do with a large chunk of money we've saved while we are in England? We will be renting over there and would still like to use the money as a down payment on a house in the U.S. when we return. We will be settling in a fairly high cost of living city in order to be close to family, so we will probably need at least this much money to make a decent down payment. I hate to see the money sit in a regular savings account earning nothing for 2 years, but it also doesn't seem wise to invest in index funds when we'll need access to the money in such a short period of time. Are there any short-term, higher-yielding, lower-risk options that you know of? What would you do in our situation? Thanks again for all you do, and keep up the great work.
Sara, congratulations on living on one income and saving the other. That is awesome. Steve, can we get a round of applause here? So you've got $40,000 that you will need in 2 years. You'll hate to see it in a savings account because a savings account and money market accounts and CDs all pay like pretty terrible interest rates right now. But of course, as you said, it does not make sense to put this into index funds or in any other equities because the volatility is just too high. The risk of loss is too high. The stock market, as you know, the stock market is not a high yield savings account. So here are a couple of options. Number one, you could buy treasury notes. Now, I'm going to pause here and we're going to go through a quick vocabulary lesson. Treasury bills are short-term government securities that have maturities that range from anywhere between a few days to at the most 1 year, 52 weeks. So that's a treasury bill. Treasury notes are government securities that have maturities of 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, all the way up to 10 years. And treasury bonds are government securities that mature in 30 years. Now, the reason that treasury bonds, which we also just commonly refer to as bonds, because they have a maturity within 30 years, most investors don't want to hang on to them. I shouldn't say most, but many investors don't want to hang on to them for that particular period of time. That's just too long. And so there's this entire market where people buy and sell bonds all day long and sometimes make money on speculation as to whether or not bond prices will rise or fall. If you hold a bond to maturity, meaning if you hold a bond 30 years, you're not going to lose money on it. There's a whole bunch of frenetic trading activity that happens on a secondary market, but fundamentally, if you, Sara, buy a bond through the Treasury Department and you hold on to it until maturity, meaning you hold on to it for 30 years, you're not going to lose in that situation, assuming the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. Of course, you don't want to hold on to something for 30 years. You want to hold on to something for 2 years. And so in your case, a treasury note could be ideal. Now, treasury notes, frankly, they don't pay that much. We're in a very low interest rate environment. So the good news for that is that you're likely to be able to get a mortgage with a low interest rate. But the bad news for that is that the yields that you'll be able to get from things like treasury notes, as well as savings accounts, money market accounts, CDs, it's low when you're trying to be the lender, which is effectively what you're doing when you're buying a treasury note or a bond. And it's also low when you're being the borrower, which is what you're doing when you're taking out a mortgage. So, we're playing in a low rate environment, both for better and for worse. Now, if you want to buy a treasury note, you can do so directly at treasurydirect.gov. We will link to that in the show notes, which is at affordanything.com/episode 104. I just went to that website and I checked the table for recently auctioned securities that have not matured. And what I'm seeing is that as of the time of this recording, which is November 14, 2017. What's reflected on the Treasury Direct website is that 2-year Treasury notes, also known as T-notes, recently went for an interest rate of 1.5%. So is that better than what you would get in a savings account? Mostly yes. Again, we're not talking about jaw-dropping rates, but 1.5 is better than 1. And if you hold it to maturity, you have very low risk. And that is fundamentally what you want. You want very low risk because you're going to need that $40,000 when you come back to the States in 2 years. So yes, it's possible that you'll miss out on some gains in the broader market, but that is the cost of protecting yourself against the downside. Now, for the sake of context, I do have to tell you that there are some people who would answer this question by discussing ultra short-term bond funds. Now, these are bond funds in which the fund managers invest in bonds with very short-term durations, very short-term maturities. Some people might talk about that. Some people might. I wouldn't because, I guess I did just talk about it, but I would not personally go in that direction if I were in your shoes. Because the risk of a ultra short-term bond fund is rising interest rates. You're exposing yourself to the risk of loss. And to me, that risk premium isn't worth it. The premium between what you might be able to get just buying a T-note for 2 years and holding it to maturity versus what you may be able to get with an ultra short-term bond fund, I just don't see that spread being worth the risk, personally. And then finally, of course, there are always CDs, certificates of deposit. I just did an online search, and the rates I'm seeing there are about ballpark-ish, about 1.5% as well. But hey, you know what? For the 12-month period ending in September 2017, the U.S. inflation rate was 2.2%, according to an update that was published on October 13 by the U.S. Labor Department. So if you're getting 1.5, 1.6%, and the inflation rate is 2.2, you're almost keeping up with inflation. And if your need is to park your money for 2 years and preserve your liquidity and keep your risk minimal, then keeping up with inflation is really the goal that you're going for. And so T-notes and CDs can help you do that. I will put some links in the show notes. Again, that's affordanything.com/episode 104 that could point you towards some of these resources. And best of luck. Have fun living in England. That sounds awesome. And congratulations on setting yourself up into such a good financial position. Isn't it great that you're able to move to England with your student loans paid off? That's awesome. So cool. Have a great time there. Have an extra beer for me. And thanks for calling in, Sara.
Hey, did you enjoy this excerpt from the Afford Anything podcast? Then be sure to subscribe to Paula's YouTube channel. Not only is every podcast episode and Ask Paula question released here on YouTube, other creative deep thought videos are created just for you. Remember, you can watch anything, just not everything. Fill your YouTube viewing time with more videos to make you think and grow so you can afford anything. Go ahead, hit that little red subscribe button. We'll take care of the rest.